In this video, I'll be reviewing a really great Blender add-on for easy texture baking, and that is the Auto Bake Blender Addon. So if you've watched some of my other baking tutorials on how to do texture baking with Blender's default baking tools, then you'll know that texture baking in Blender can be quite complicated and really hard to do, but the Auto Bake add-on makes the baking process so much easier and so much faster, and it can save you a lot of time and just make it so much easier to texture bake your models. And I do have some affiliate links in the description to where you can purchase the add-on on the Blender Market and also Gumroad. So if you purchase the add-on through my affiliate links, then I will earn a small commission, but it won't cost you anything extra. So in this video, I'll be reviewing the add-on and I'll show you the basics of how to use the add-on, and then I'll also show you how to bake high poly detail to a low poly mesh using the add-on. Now you can of course watch this video and learn the basics of how to use the add-on, but on the add-on product page, they have a very detailed documentation, so definitely check that out if you want to read more about the add-on. You can also check out the add-on's Trello page where they have known bugs and different improvement ideas. And you can also join their Discord as well if you're interested. So for demonstration, I'll be baking this model here, and this is a monkey head with a hat, and then there's three different materials. There's this dark material, there's a red material, and then there's also this procedural metal material, which I've added to the monkey. So if you've purchased and downloaded the add-on, we first need to install it in Blender. So let's click here on Edit, and we're going to open up the preferences. Then you can click here on the Add-ons tab, and then you can click on the Install button. Then you can locate to the folder where you have the add-on, and you can just double click on it, and then if you don't see it here, you can go to the search and you can just search for it. So Auto Bake, you can check mark the Auto Bake add-on, and then also save Blender's user preferences. And then we can close Blender's user preferences. So then over here on the side panel, if you go to the render properties, you can see right down here, here is a bake tab, and this is Blender's default baking tools. And then right underneath the bake tab, there is the Auto Bake. And so this is the add-on settings. And if you don't see the add-on for some reason, you need to make sure you're in the Cycles rendering engine because Eevee doesn't support baking. So make sure you're using Cycles. If for some reason you are using Eevee, you can jump over to Cycles and do the texture baking and then go back to Eevee once you're done with the baking. Now at the time of filming this video, the add-on can only bake one object at once. So if you have multiple objects, for example, if this hat object and the monkey were two different objects, I would need to bake them separately. However, in future versions, they may be adding support for just selecting multiple objects and baking them all at once. However, the add-on can bake objects with multiple materials. So this object here has three different materials, and because they're all one object, it'll bake all of the different materials. Alright, so the first thing that we always need to do before doing any texture baking is UV unwrap the objects so that the textures can actually bake correctly on a map. So we're going to go into edit mode, we're going to select everything, and I'm just going to hit the U button, and we're going to do the Smart UV Project just for an example, just to quickly do a decent UV unwrap. Here on the island margin, I'm going to do like a 0.003, just so that there isn't any overlapping of the islands, and then click on OK. So the Smart UV Project is just a quick and easy way to do a quick UV unwrap. So now I'm going to go over here to the UV editing, and here is our UV unwrap. Now I'm not going to be covering how to do UV unwrapping in this video. If you want to watch my UV unwrapping for beginners tutorial, I will have a link in the description to that. Real quick, what I am going to do though is deselect everything in the UV editor, and I'll click on select, and I'll click on select overlap. And I can see here that there's just a couple things which are overlapped. So what I'm going to do is just hold down the shift key, select these pieces here, and just bring them down, just so that they're not overlapping, and also bring this over here. This isn't the greatest UV unwrap, but it will work fine for what we're doing. And of course, you can check out my UV unwrapping for beginners tutorial. Let's go back over here to the layout. So when you are baking, you need to make sure that you select the object that you want to bake. If you don't have any object selected, then it won't bake correctly. So just make sure that you select one object, and then that's the object that it will bake. So by selecting the object, you're telling the add-on that that's what you're going to bake. Now you can see that the Auto Bake button is red right now, and that's because we need to actually add in the textures that we want the add-on to bake. So right down here, you can see there's a bake list, so we can click on this plus here to add more textures. So I'll click on the plus here, and you can see the default one is a base color, and then you have the resolution right here, so you can drag the resolution, or you can click on these arrows here to turn it up by the increments. So usually I bake to 4K, so these different texture resolutions here are like the standard resolutions. Since I usually bake to 4K, 4K, I'm just going to use this one here, the 4096. And then if you click here on the type, there are many different bake types that you can choose from. So you can see there's pretty much every bake type that you're going to want. There's the base color, metallic, roughness, and normal, and many more maps. So I'm going to be adding the base color, then I'll click on the plus here to add a new one, and then this one, I'll click on this one, and I'll go up here to the top, and I'm going to choose the roughness map. Then I'll click on the plus here to add another one, and I'll go up here to the top again, and I'm also going to choose the normal map. Now, the hat objects, they don't have any metallic values, but this monkey head here is a metal material, so I also want to bake a metallic map. So I'll click on the plus here to add one more map, click here, and I'll choose the metallic. So right up here, just choose the metallic map. So we have the base color, roughness, or normal, and metallic. And if for some reason you want to uncheck them, if you uncheck them, then it won't be baked, but I'll keep all of them checkmarked. And then also if you want to rename them, you can. So for example, on the base color, you could rename this just to color or albedo or whatever you want to call it. I will leave it as base color. So then right down here, you can actually make the name. So on the prefix here, I'm going to call it monkey. And then there's just a bridge here. You can just keep this how you want. And then there's also a suffix, which is going to be at the very end. I'll just keep this how it is, but I will just call the prefix monkey. And I'll come back to this once we bake the textures, and I'll show you what the naming does. All right, let's go down here to the format. So for the format, I am just going to use PNG, and I'll keep the other settings how they are. You could, of course, bake to JPEG or some other file format. I'm just going to be baking to PNG. Now, right down here, we have a file path, so we can choose where we want the add-on to save the textures, because you can actually tell the add-on to automatically save all the textures to your computer. Now, if you want it to automatically save the textures, you need to go up here to the top, and you need to click on the export checkmark right here. If you don't have this checkmarked, then after it bakes, it will bake it, but it won't actually save the textures, and you could just manually click on the export button to export the textures. However, I want it to automatically save the textures after they're done baking, so I'll click on the checkmark here. So we can now scroll down to the export, and we're going to click on this file icon to choose the path. And I'll just save it here in my files with the Blender file, and then click on select folder. Now, if you checkmark these subfolders here, it's going to create different folders for each map. So the roughness, the normal, the metallic, and all the other maps. However, I'm not going to use the subfolders. I'm just going to have it baked to one folder. Now, another really important thing is that you choose the color override, because if you scroll down to the very bottom and open up the color management settings, sorry, my screencast keys are in the way there, but you can see that you may be using the filament color space or the AGX color space, which is the default. And so this color space is going to actually affect how the colors look in the 3D viewport. But we don't want the color management to affect the baking. So let's scroll right back up here, and we are going to override the colors. So we're going to click on the color override, and then here on the color override, we're going to change the view to the raw, and then the look here, we're going to change that to none. So this way it won't use any of the color managements, it's just going to use the raw color management. Now we can also scroll down here to the margin settings, and the margin settings is going to add a little bit of a bleeding effect past the UV mapping. So if I go back over here to the UV editing and zoom in here, when it bakes the textures, depending on the size of the island margin, it'll extend the color right out here past the UV map. So you should have a small amount of it. If I go back here to the layout, it is a good idea to have a small amount of this margin here. However, 16 I think is a little bit big. We don't even need it to be 16. So I'll just turn it down to 8. So you may need to play around with this if you can see some of the end of the texture, but I think for most things around 8 or 16 will work just fine. Now this selected to active, I'll be showing you how to use this later in the video, and this is how you can bake high poly detail to a low poly mesh. So I'll be covering that later. And then also the sampling here, really you just need one sample for most things. If for some reason the texture bake is looking kind of grainy, you may want to turn the samples up, but for most things that you're texture baking, you can really just use one sample. You can also use the denoise if you want to, but I find that for most things you really don't need to use the denoise. Alright, so make sure to press Ctrl S to save your file before you bake, and make sure you select the object in the 3D viewport that you want it to bake. And we have this check mark enabled, so it'll automatically export the maps and save it to files on your computer once it's finished baking. So we'll just click on Auto Bake and then click on OK. Now what's really cool about the add-on is you can actually pause the baking. And so if you pause the baking, once it's finished one of the maps, it'll just pause it. And it's also going to show you which one it's baking. So it's already finished the base color and it just finished the roughness. And now it's doing the normal and the metallic. I can just pause this though if I want to. And also I can cancel it if I want to. So this is quite helpful, especially if you have lots of different maps or if it's a very large object that will take a long time to bake. But I'll just click on resume here and we'll just let this finish. mesh. And of course you can click on the cancel button if you want to cancel it for some reason. All right, and it's already done. It really didn't take that long. So then what you can do after it's done baking is you can click on confirm and then click on OK, and it will just clear that bake. You can see it's going to still keep all your settings. So if you need to rebake it, you can just by clicking on auto bake again, but that's just going to confirm that that baking is finished. So let's click right over here to go to the shading workspace, and you can see in the shading workspace, the add-on has saved and added in the maps into this material. And let me just open this up so you can see the name, and then I'll click right back over here to go to the add-on settings. So I just want to show you what the name is going to do. So you can see the prefix we called monkey, so it added monkey at the starting of the name. Then it added the words base color because that was the base color. Then the bridge is going to be this little part right here. And then you can see there's also the suffix, which is right at the very end, which is px on default. That's standing for pixels because the resolution of pixels is 4096 by 4096. So that is how the naming works. So now what you could do is just plug in all the baked textures to your shader. However, what I'm going to be doing is using the principled texture setup to automatically set up the textures. And also these have all baked to one material. So I will actually be deleting all three materials and adding in a new material. Now I did also want to show you what the add-on has done in your file browser. So if you go to the folder where you've saved the textures, you can see it's created a monkey folder. And if I go inside the folder, you can see here are all the baked maps. So here is the base color, and the metallic and the normal and the roughness. And the add-on really just makes the whole process so much easier because it automatically saves all the textures. Whereas when you're using the default baking tools of Blender, you have to manually save each texture, and so it just takes a lot more work. All right, so back in Blender, I'm going to click on the object and I'm going to duplicate it with Shift D, just bring it over here. And so this way we can compare the procedural material to the baked texture. So I'm going to select this monkey head with the hat here, and I will get rid of all the materials by going to the materials panel, and I'll just click on the minus here to get rid of all the materials. Let's click on new to add a new material, and I can just call it like baked material. All right, so then to automatically add in all the texture maps, I'm going to be using the principled texture setup using the feature of the Node Wrangler. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on Edit, you can go to the Preferences, and over here on the Add-ons tab, you can go to the Search and just start to type in Node, and you can check mark the Node Wrangler add-on. So this add-on is built into Blender, so you can just check mark it and then save the preferences. Let's close Blender's user preferences, and I'm now going to select the principled shader, and I'm going to press Control-Shift-T. And when you press Control-Shift-T, that will bring up Blender's file browser. You can locate to the folder where you have all the textures, just select all the textures and click on Principled Texture Setup. And you can see Blender is going to detect the names in the textures, and it's automatically going to set up all the texture maps properly. Now, if you don't know how to set up texture maps properly, I do have a tutorial showing you how to manually set this all up. But once you know how to set up texture maps, the Principled Texture Setup makes it really easy to quickly set up all the maps. So it's using the UV coordinates, and then it's added in all the textures correctly to the principled shader. And you can see also on the metallic, the roughness, and the normal, it's automatically set the color space to non-color. You can see this one has the baked textures, and then this one has the other materials, but you can see they look exactly the same. But this one here is using baked textures. So using the add-on is much easier than Blender's default baking tools. All right, so I'll now show you how to bake high poly detail to a low poly mesh using the add-on. So for example, I'll just use a monkey head again. So I'll go to the add menu and let's go here to mesh, and I will add a monkey head, and then I'll press Control-1, and that's going to add a subdivision surface with one level. I'll just make sure that these are both set to 1, and then I can click on the drop down and apply this. And then I'll use the object context menu and shade the object smooth. And then if I open up the outliner here, I'm going to double click on this and I'll rename this to low poly. So I need to make sure I UV unwrap this so we have a decent UV unwrap. So I will go into edit mode and I'll select everything. And I will hit U, and again, I'm just going to choose the Smart UV Project, and on the island margin, I'll turn this to a 0.003, something like that, so the islands don't overlap. Let's click on OK, and then we can go over here to the UV editing, and I'll just zoom in here. And then something that I want to do is re-UV unwrap the eyes. So I'll deselect everything. I will press the L key with my mouse hovered over the eye, and then also the L key with my mouse hovered over that eye, and then I'll hit U again, and we'll just click on Unwrap. Now if I press the A key to select all the mesh, you can see the eyes, and I need to scale the eyes down and move them out of the way because they're overlapping the other mesh. So I'll press the L key with my mouse hovered over that eye, and I'll scale it down, and I'll just stick it somewhere here, and then deselect everything, press the L key with my mouse hovered over that one. We'll scale it down and I'll just move it right over here and just stick it here. And I want to make sure that it's not overlapping, but it's also in the texture space. And as I mentioned earlier, you can definitely check out my UV Unwrapping for Beginners tutorial if you don't know how to do UV Unwrapping in Blender. So that's going to be my UV Unwrap. So I'll go back here to the layout. So I'm now going to duplicate this object and make a high poly version that we'll be sculpting on. So I'll press Shift D to duplicate and then just right click so it stays where it is. I can double click on this one and I'll rename this one to high poly here in the outliner. And then let's press Control 4. So Control 4 is going to add a subdivision surface, and I'll make sure the viewport and render levels are set to 4. So it's very high quality. And then I'll click on the drop down and click on Apply. Now here on the low poly in the outliner, I'm going to click on the eye here just to hide it. So if I go into edit mode, you can see this is the high poly object, and this is the one that we'll be sculpting the details on. So let's just click here on object mode, and I will just go to the sculpt mode. And then I'm also going to click on this X here on the symmetry so that when I sculpt on this side, it'll go over to the other side. I can also press the T key to open the side panel, and I have the different brushes here. So I'm going to hold down the Control key and click around here, zoom in here, and I'm just going to kind of sculpt in some eyes. So just sculpt in an eye shape, and then hold down the Shift key and just kind of smooth that out there. And then also I want to add maybe like some eyebrows. So I'm going to just sculpt some eyebrows here. So I'll turn the strength down a bit, maybe make my brush a bit smaller, and then I can kind of sculpt some eyebrows. And then once I've sculpted the eyebrows, I'll hold down the Shift key and I'll just kind of smooth them out and make them a bit more flat. All right, so that's what we're going to use for the sculpting details just for this example. So we're going to bake these to a normal map on the low poly mesh. So let's just click on sculpt mode and go back to object mode. So I'll now press Alt H to unhide the other objects. And it is important that the objects are on top of each other. That is important that they are both in the same exact space. But of course, this object has the sculpting detail, so it's popping out of the other object. So let's now click here to go to the render settings, and again make sure you're in the cycles render, and I'm going to scroll down and open up the auto bake settings. So now here on the bake list, I'm just going to be adding in a normal map. So I'll click on the plus here to add a new map, and let's also change it to 4K. That's a good resolution. Here on the base color, I'm just going to bring my mouse up here, and let's go up to the top, and I'm going to be using the normal. So we'll choose the normal map. And then we can go down here to the name, and again, I can just like rename this whatever I want. I'll just rename this to like monkey details. You can change the bridge and the suffix if you want to. I'll just leave them how they are. Here in the file format, I'm just going to leave this set to the PNG. And then right here on the file path, I can also click on this button here to tell Blender where I want to save the texture. And I'll save it in my folder with my other file, and I'll click on select folder. All right, so it'll automatically save this texture into that folder. However, I need to scroll up here and I need to check mark the export button so it automatically saves it. All right, so then here on the color override, we want to make sure we turn this on again so it overrides the color management and it doesn't use the AGX or the Filmic. So here on the view, let's just change this to raw, and then on the look here, we're going to leave this set to none. And then also you can change the island margin if you need to. I'll maybe just change this down to like an 8 like we did before. And then we want to turn on the selected to active. And this is very important for baking the high poly detail to the low poly mesh. So for the target object, this is going to be the high poly object. So we're going to choose high poly, and this is why I named them because it just makes it much easier to select them. Then here on the source object, I'm going to be using list instead of collection. I'll just choose list. And then here on the list, you can choose the objects. I'm just going to click here and I will choose the low poly. So we're basically telling it that it'll take the high poly details here and it will bake it to the source object, which is going to be the low poly mesh. All right, and then of course there's the sampling and the denoise if you want to change that. For this bake here, I find that really you just need one sample, and I really don't need to use the denoise, but you can use that if you want to. Now there is one more important setting, and that is this extrusion here. And so this is because the high poly detail, the high poly mesh, is extruding out of this mesh, and so we need to add some extrusion so it bakes it correctly. So for an object like this, for my scene, I've really just found that like turning it to a 0.1 will work just fine. All right, so let's press Ctrl S to save the file again. And before I bake this, I want to make sure I select both objects. So select the high poly mesh and the low poly mesh. Let's go right up here to the top again. And we're going to click on Auto Bake. and then just click on OK, and we'll just wait for that to bake. And the normal map has finished baking. So now what I'm going to do is select the objects here, and I'm going to move them over. Actually, I'm going to move this one over here and this one over here, and we're just going to compare the two with the normal map. So if I go over here to the shading workspace and select this object here, you can see it's baked the normal map. What I'm going to do is just select the normal map here and just delete it. And then I'm going to again be using the principled texture setup, which I used earlier in this video. So I'll select the principled shader and I'll press Ctrl-Shift-T. Then I'll locate to the folder where I saved the texture. I can click on the texture and click on principled texture setup. So then just to be able to see this better, I'm going to turn the base color to like a black color, and then this object here, this object, I'm also going to turn it to a black color. All right, so I'll make this a bit bigger, and just so you can see the material a bit better, I'm going to go to the viewport shading. I'll turn the strength up to like a 3 and make it a different HDRI here. So just to review this over here is the high poly object, and you can see if I go into edit mode, it's high poly and it has all the sculpting details, so the sculpting details of the eye and the eyebrow. And then here is the low poly mesh where we've baked the high poly detail to the low poly mesh using the normal map. And you can see even though the object is very low poly, the normal map now is showing the texture of the eyebrows and also that detail there in the eye. So these objects both look the same, but this one is much lower detail because we baked the high poly detail to the low poly mesh. So that is how you use the Auto Bake Blender add-on. It really speeds up the texture baking process and makes texture baking so much easier in Blender. So if you'd like to purchase the add-on, then you can find my affiliate links in the description to the add-on on the Blender Market and also Gumroad. And if you purchase the add-on through my affiliate links, then I'll earn a small commission, but it won't cost you anything extra. So that's a great way to help support this channel. So I hope you found this video helpful, and thank you for watching.